Mrs. Debris was a 50-year-old widow who lived in Lagos, Nigeria. She was a wealthy woman who worked in an oil and gas company and was respected by everyone around her. People admired her for her success and confidence. But deep inside, she felt lonely since her husband died. Years ago, she hadn't found anyone to love again. She missed the feeling of being loved and cared for. Her only child, Chioke, was her pride and joy. Choki, a 27-year-old hardworking and cheerful young man, was very close to his mother. He loved and respected her deeply, and they had a strong bond. Mrs. Debris always said Chijioke reminded her of her late husband. Chijioke had a best friend named Desmond. Desmond was 28 years old and very handsome. He was charming, confident, and funny. He had been friends with Chijioke for many years, and Chijioke always trusted him. Desmond often visited Mrs. Debris' house, and she treated him like family. It was December and the holiday season had begun. Chijioke decided to invite Desmond to stay at their house for the festive period. It was something they did every year, and Mrs. Debris didn't mind having Desmond around. The first day Desmond arrived, Mrs. Debris noticed something different about him. He wasn't just the funny, friendly young man she had known for years. That day she noticed how attractive he was. He was tall, well-dressed, and had a confident way of speaking. For the first time in many years, Mrs. Debris felt butterflies in her stomach. At first she was confused. Why am I feeling this way about my son's best friend? She thought. She tried to ignore it, but every time she saw Desmond around the house, her feelings grew stronger. She started to see him differently, not as her son's friend, but as a man she could fall in love with. Mrs. Debris hadn't felt this way about anyone since her husband passed away. She was surprised by her emotions, but couldn't stop herself from thinking about Desmond. Desmond didn't notice Mrs. Debris' feelings at first, but as time passed, he started to feel something too. He couldn't ignore how elegant and graceful she was. Mrs. Debris wasn't just beautiful, she was smart and confident. Desmond admired her strength and independence. However, he was scared. How could he tell Chijioke that he had feelings for his mother? He knew Chijioke would never accept it. He felt guilty just thinking about it, but his feelings kept growing. Every time he was alone, he imagined what it would be like to be with Mrs. Debris. One day, Desmond decided he couldn't keep it a secret anymore. He had to tell Chioke the truth, no matter how difficult it was. He knew it could destroy their friendship, but he didn't want to lie to his best friend. One afternoon, Desmond gathered all his courage and went to Chijioke's house. Chijioke was in the living room, watching a football match on TV. Desmond sat beside him, looking nervous. "Bro, there's something I need to tell you," Desmond said, avoiding eye contact. Chijioke laughed, thinking it was a joke. "What is it? Did you break up with another girl again?" "No, it's serious," Desmond said. "Family, it's about your mom." Chijioke's smile disappeared. He stared at Desmond, confused. "What about my mom?" Desmond hesitated but finally said, "I have feelings for her. I think I'm in love with her." Chijioke's face turned red with anger. "What did you just say?" he shouted, standing up. "I know it sounds bad, but I couldn't hide it anymore. I respect you, but I love her," Desmond explained, trying to calm him. Chijioke couldn't believe his ears. He grabbed Desmond by the shirt. "You're joking, right? You want to date my mother?" "My mother? I'm not joking, Chijioke. I'm serious about her," Desmond said, pulling away. Without warning, Chijioke punched Desmond in the face. "You're a disgrace. How could you even think about this? You're supposed to be my friend." Desmond wiped the blood from his lip and said, "I'm sorry, but I can't help how I feel." Chijioke pointed at the door. "Get out of my house, and don't you dare come near my mother again. If you do, you'll regret it." Despite Chijioke warning, Desmond and Mrs. Debris couldn't stay away from each other. They began meeting in secret. Mrs. Debris was nervous at first, knowing how upset her son would be if he found out. "Desmond, are you sure about this?" she asked one evening as they met in a private restaurant. "Yes, I've never been more sure of anything," Desmond replied, holding her hand. "You're everything I've been looking for, and I don't care what anyone thinks." Mrs. Debris smiled. For the first time in years, she felt loved and appreciated. She began to trust Desmond more and more. They spent time together, going on dates and talking about their future. One evening, as they walked by the beach, Desmond said, "I want to be with you forever. I don't care if Joke hates me for it. I proved to him that I'm serious about us. I hope he understands." One day, Mrs. Debris said, leaning on his shoulder. One night, Desmond arrived at Mrs. Debris' house with a bouquet of roses. He was dressed in a suit and looked nervous but excited. "Why are you so dressed up, MRS?" Debris asked, laughing. "I have something important to say," Desmond said, getting down on one knee. Mrs. De gasped, covering her mouth. "Desmond, what are you doing?" He pulled out a small box and opened it, revealing a diamond ring. "Debris, you've changed my life in so many ways. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me?" Tears filled MRS Debris' eyes. She nodded and said, "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you." They hugged, and Desmond slipped the ring onto her finger. But the surprises weren't over. A few weeks later, Desmond visited Mrs. Debris with more flowers. As they sat in the living room, she held his hand and said, "There's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" Desmond asked, concerned. "I'm pregnant, MRS Debris said softly. Desmond's eyes widened. "Pregnant? Are you sure?" "Yes, I took a test." "You're going to be a father," she said, smiling nervously. Desmond smiled and hugged her. "This is amazing news. We are going to be a family." Chijioke had been avoiding Desmond and his mother ever since the confrontation. But one day, while scrolling through social media, he saw a photo that stopped him cold. It was a picture of his mother, wearing an engagement ring, with Desmond by her side. The caption read, "Forever and always. Can't wait to spend my life with you." Furious, Chijioke stormed into his mother's house that evening. He found her in the living room, sipping tea. "Mom, what is this nonsense I'm seeing online?" he shouted, throwing his phone on the table. Mrs. Debris looked at the photo inside. "Chijioke, I was going to tell you. Desmond and I are getting married." Chijioke jaw dropped. "You're marrying him? After everything I told you? After I told him to stay away from you?" "Chijioke, I understand you're upset, but Desmond makes me happy," Mrs. Debris said calmly. "I haven't felt this way in years." "What are you even saying, Mom? He is my friend. He cannot be with you. Find someone else, please," Chijioke yelled. "I don't care if he is your friend. He makes me happy and we are meant to be together," she said. Chijioke clenched his fist. "You've already made your choice. Don't expect me to support this madness." The day of the wedding arrived. The venue was beautifully decorated with golden chairs and white roses everywhere. Guests were arriving in their finest clothes, and photographers captured every moment. Desmond stood at the altar, looking confident, while Mrs. Debris prepared herself in a dressing room. She was nervous but excited to start a new chapter in her life. Meanwhile, Chijioke sat in his car outside the venue, his heart pounding. He stared at the gun on the passenger seat, his mind racing. He couldn't believe his best friend and his mother had done this to him. "I warned him. I warned both of them," Chijioke muttered to himself. He grabbed the gun and tucked it into his jacket. As the ceremony began, Chijioke slipped into the back of the hall, unnoticed. The guests clapped as MRS Debris walked down the aisle, looking stunning in her wedding gown. When the officiant asked if anyone objects to this union, "Speak now or forever hold your peace." Chijioke stood up. "I object," he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. The room fell silent. Mrs. Debris gasped, and Desmond turned pale. "Chijioke, what are you doing here?" Desmond asked nervously. "You think I'd let this happen?" Chijioke said, pulling out the gun. The guests screamed and ducked under tables as Chijioke pointed the gun at Desmond. "You betrayed me, Desmond. You were my best friend, and you stabbed me in the back." "Chijioke," yelled Chijioke, "please put the gun down," Desmond pleaded, raising his hands. "We can talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," Chijioke shouted. "I warned you, but you don't listen." Mrs. Debris stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Chijioke, stop this, please. Put the gun down," she pleaded. "You should have thought about that before you choose to get married to my best friend," Chijioke shouted. In a fit of rage, he pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the hall as Desmond collapsed to the ground. MRS Debris screamed and ran to Desmond, holding his lifeless body in her arms. Chijioke stood frozen, staring at what he had done. The police arrived moments later, arresting him as he dropped a gun and fell to his knees. I didn't want it to end like this, Chijioke whispered as they took him away. The end. What would you have done if you discovered your mom was in a relationship with your best friend and was about to get married? Drop your thoughts on the comment section and subscribe.